Hey guys, imagine you fall asleep in your warm, comfy bed tonight, a soft pillow under your head, your phone charging beside you, the faint hum of your fan or a sea in the background, and then, for no reason at all, you open your eyes and realize something's wrong. The air smells different, your back hurts, there's straw under you, you're not in your bed, you're lying on a pile of hay, and there's a chicken staring straight into your soul. Welcome to the Middle Ages. You've just woken up in a time where comfort doesn't exist, personal hygiene is a rumor, and survival is an everyday miracle. The good news, you're about to experience what life was really like. The bad news, you probably won't survive long enough to tell anyone about it. You sit up, confused, brushing bits of straw off your clothes, only to realize you're not wearing your clothes. The soft cotton t-shirt and pajama pants are gone. Instead, you're in rough, itchy wool that smells faintly of wet animal. The air is cold and heavy, and the only light in the room comes from a small hole in the wall that someone generously calls a window. There's no glass, just a wooden shutter. Outside, you can hear people shouting, carts creaking, a rooster crowing like it's mocking you for waking up late. You take a deep breath and immediately regret it. The smell of smoke, manure, and something rotten fills your lungs. Congratulations, you've just inhaled your first medieval morning. You stumble to your feet, your legs stiff and your head spinning. The floor under you isn't really a floor. It's packed dirt mixed with bits of straw. There's something wet in one corner. You don't want to know what it is. You move toward the door, a heavy plank of wood that creaks ominously, and step outside. The sunlight hits you, and for a moment, it's beautiful. There's a village stretching out before you, small huts made of wood and mud, a few thatched roofs, and smoke curling up from chimneys. The sound of life fills the air. But then you notice something else. Everything looks filthy. The streets are muddy. Chickens are running around freely. Someone's dumping a bucket of something suspicious into the ditch. You step back just in time to avoid getting splashed. That's right, medieval plumbing is just gravity and bad luck. You look around for something familiar, something that makes sense, but there's nothing. No power lines, no cars, no paved roads, just people moving about their day, dressed in layers of brown and grey wool, their faces weathered and tired. You try to speak, maybe ask where you are, but the moment you open your mouth, you realize your words don't fit here. Excuse me, you say, and the nearest woman hauling a bucket just stares at you, like you've spoken a demoness language. You try again, slower, louder. Hello, where am I? She squints, mutters something under her breath, and hurries away. You take a few steps down the road, trying to stay calm. Maybe you're dreaming. Maybe this is one of those hyper-realistic dreams people talk about online. You pinch yourself. It hurts. Okay, not a dream. You walk past a group of men repairing a cart. They stop what they're doing to stare at you. One of them spits. The other frowns. You suddenly realize you have no idea what social rules apply here. Do you wave, smile, bow? You decide to give a friendly nod, but apparently that's wrong too, because they just exchange glances and mutter something that sounds like strange folk about. You keep walking, trying not to panic. You need food, water, and maybe a plan. But as you pass the market, a few wooden stalls with sad-looking vegetables and hunks of meat hanging in the sun, you realize you have no money, not a single medieval coin. You try to offer your watch to a merchant, but he just stares at it like it's cursed. Devil's trinket, he says, and crosses himself. You laugh nervously and back away. So much for trading technology for food. Then you smell it. Bread. The warm, comforting smell of freshly baked bread. You follow it like a cartoon character floating toward a pie. There's a baker pulling loaves from a brick oven, his face red from the heat. You try to ask for one, pointing and smiling. He gestures to a small wooden sign. The price. You pat your pockets, realize you're broke, and try to mime that you'll pay later. He doesn't like that. No coin, no bread. He snaps and points to the road. A dog growls at your feet. You back away again, your stomach rumbling. So now you're hungry, confused, and starting to attract attention. A few kids are following you, whispering and giggling. Someone throws a bit of mud at you. A woman makes the sign of the cross as you pass. You glance down at your clothes, modern stitching, strange fabric, and realize you look weird. To them, you might as well be a sorcerer. Or worse, a foreigner. And in the Middle Ages, both of those things could get you burned alive. You duck into a side alley, trying to think, your brain's racing. Okay, survive the day. Just act normal. But what does normal even mean here? People live by different rules, rules you don't know. There's no Google to look up how to fit in during the 14th century. The only way to survive is to watch and copy. You see a man walking by with a wooden bucket. He nods politely at another villager. You do the same to the next person you see. They frown. Okay, maybe that's not the right kind of nod. You try to walk slower, less suspiciously, like you belong here. It doesn't work. As you walk, you notice something else. There's no sound of birds singing, just the occasional crow and the buzz of flies. You look around and realize why. There are piles of, well, let's just say waste. Human, animal, whatever. It's everywhere. The smell is so strong you start to gag. You remember all those medieval movies where peasants just stroll around in the mud. Well, that mud is mostly not mud. You step in something and try not to think about it. A bell rings in the distance, deep and echoing. People pause what they're doing and cross themselves again. You look up and see a stone church on a hill, its bell tower looming over the village. Everyone seems to move in rhythm with it. When it rings, they pray. When it stops, they work. Religion isn't just a belief here. It's law, structure, and fear all rolled into one. You keep walking until you reach the edge of the village. Beyond it, fields stretch out, golden wheat, green grass, and people bent over, working under the sun. You think, maybe I could help them. Maybe if I work, they'll give me food. Sounds fair, right? You approach one of the men and try to explain. He doesn't understand your words, but he sees your gestures. He shrugs and points to a shovel. You grab it, trying to look confident, and start digging where he points. It's harder than you thought. Within minutes, your hands are blistered. Sweat pours down your back. Your modern body, used to typing and scrolling, is not built for this. The man laughs when you drop the shovel. You laugh too, but mostly because you're about to cry. The sun moves slowly overhead. You keep working, trying not to pass out. Eventually, the man gives you a small piece of bread and a nod. You eat it gratefully, even though it's hard as stone. It tastes like victory, medieval, moldy victory. As the day goes on, you start to notice how everyone moves with purpose. No one wastes energy. Every step, every action is about surviving. You see women washing clothes in a stream, children chasing geese, old men mending tools. There's a quiet rhythm to it, harsh, but somehow peaceful. Then you hear shouting. 2 men are fighting near the well, and a crowd forms instantly. One of them swings a stick, the other ducks, and everyone cheers. No guards show up, no police. Eventually, one man falls, blood dripping from his face, and the other walks away like nothing happened. The crowd disperses. You realize there's no one to stop violence here. Justice is improvised. The sun begins to set, and the air grows colder. Smoke fills the sky as people light fires for cooking. You follow your new coworker back toward the village, hoping maybe he'll let you sleep somewhere. He leads you to a small barn filled with hay. You can stay there, he gestures. You thank him, even though he doesn't understand. You collapse into the hay, exhausted. As darkness settles, you hear wolves howling in the distance, dogs barking, and the creak of wood as the wind pushes against the barn. You stare up at the thatched roof, bits of straw falling onto your face. You survived the day, barely, but as you drift off to sleep, cold and hungry, you realize something important. Tomorrow, you'll have to do it all again, and you're not sure you'll make it. The rooster wakes you before dawn. Not gently, not politely. It screams into your ear like an alarm clock with rage issues. You groan and roll over in the hay, your entire body aching. Every muscle feels bruised. Your throat is dry. Your back itches from the straw, and there's something damp under your leg. You hope it's just water. Spoiler, it's not. The barn smells worse now. A mix of animals, smoke, and whatever passed for bathroom last night. You sit up, rubbing your eyes, and realize it's still pitch dark, except for the faint glow of a few torches flickering outside. Morning in medieval times doesn't wait for the sun. People start before it even rises, because daylight is the only working clock they have. You stand up, stretching, and immediately regret it. Your clothes are stiff and rough, and you've still got bits of straw sticking to your hair. You hear voices outside, the sound of boots on dirt, and a cart creaking past. It's freezing, your breath turns to fog. You wrap your arms around yourself and step out, and instantly, the world hits you with sound, smell, and smoke. The entire village is awake. You see figures moving through the mist, women carrying buckets, men leading animals, a child chasing a runaway goose. Fires crackle as people start cooking. Smoke hangs heavy, stinging your eyes. Somewhere nearby, someone dumps out a bucket from a window. You hear the splash before you see it, and instinctively jump aside. You were seconds away from getting baptized by the morning chamber pot. Congratulations, you've just survived your first medieval waste disposal system. You look around, stunned. Every street, if you can even call it that, is a mixture of mud, straw, and filth. There's no drainage, no sanitation. The smell alone could knock you out. You notice how casually people walk through it, like it's just part of life. Barefoot kids run past laughing, splashing through puddles that are definitely not water. You step carefully, trying not to gag, but it's useless. There's no clean path. Everywhere you step, there's something unpleasant waiting for your shoe. You spot a woman nearby, carrying 2 buckets on a wooden yoke. She's heading toward a well. You decide to follow her. Water, you need water. The well is surrounded by a few villagers already. Some are filling buckets. Others are gossiping in low voices. The woman lowers her rope and pulls up a bucket. You notice the water is brownish, cloudy. She doesn't care. She just fills her container and leaves. You bend down and peer inside the well. You can't see the bottom. There's a faint smell of rot. Still, your throat is dry enough to take the risk. You scoop a handful of water and taste it. It's warm, gritty, and somehow metallic. You almost spit it out, but force yourself to swallow. It's disgusting, but it's the only drink you're getting. As the sky brightens, you start to see more detail. Smoke curls up from chimneys, carrying the smell of burning wood, and something vaguely edible, maybe porridge. The sound of church bells rings again, deep and slow, echoing across the valley. Everyone pauses for a brief prayer before continuing with their work. You notice how synchronized it feels. The whole village moves to the rhythm of faith and habit. No one complains, no one hesitates. You wander toward one of the huts, drawn by the smell of food. Through a cracked door, you see a family sitting on low stools, huddled around a pot hanging over a fire. The room is dark except for the orange light flickering on their faces. You can hear them slurping something thick. The father looks up, sees you, and frowns. You step back quickly. He doesn't say a word, but his look says everything. Outsiders aren't welcome at breakfast. You look up and see the village in full motion now. Blacksmiths pounding iron, women washing clothes in a stream, children carrying baskets of kindling. The air is full of chatter and clanging. Even the animals join in. Roosters crowing, pigs squealing, dogs barking at everything. You feel like you're inside a living machine. Every person a cog turning without rest. A man passes by, pushing a cart full of hay, and you notice how exhausted he looks. His hands are rough, his nails black, his back bent. He's probably been awake since before you even stirred. You realize quickly, in the Middle Ages, sleep is a luxury. People rise before the sun and collapse after it sets. There's no such thing as me time. Life is an endless loop of labor and prayer. You keep walking, trying to understand where you fit into all this. Everywhere you look, someone's working. There's no space for idleness. Even old people are busy, mending nets or watching fires. You start to feel eyes on you again. Villagers noticing the stranger wandering aimlessly. You can't blend in. Your clothes still look odd. Your hair too clean. Your mannerisms too strange. You force yourself to copy their movements. A small nod here, a quiet step there. You pass by a butcher's stall. Flies swarm around hanging cuts of meat. The butcher, a burly man with arms like tree trunks, slams a cleaver down onto a table, splitting bone with a crack that makes you flinch. He notices you watching and grins, revealing yellow teeth. Want some? He asks. Or at least that's what you think he says. You shake your head. He laughs and goes back to work. The smell of raw flesh and blood follows you as you move on. Further ahead, you find a woman stirring a pot over an open fire. The steam smells earthy and sour, probably cabbage soup. She catches you looking and hands you a small wooden bowl, muttering something kind. You take it carefully, nodding in gratitude. You taste it watery, bitter, but warm. It feels like heaven compared to the cold air. She smiles faintly when she sees you eating, then waves you off. You thank her again, though she doesn't understand the words. For the first time all day, someone has shown you a little mercy. You continue walking as the village fully wakes up. The noise grows louder. Hammers, carts, dogs, chatter, bells. Smoke thickens in the air. Somewhere, A rooster crows again, late to the party. You notice how the light hits everything differently here, softer, golden, filtered through haze. It's beautiful, but brutal. You start to understand why people aged fast here. Every task is physical, every breath filled with smoke and dust. A few kids run by carrying sticks, laughing. You smile. Then one of them throws a rock at you, misses, and runs off. You sigh. Maybe not all medieval kids are adorable. You spot a small chapel at the edge of the village, its wooden door open. You step inside, drawn by curiosity. The air is cool and quiet. Candles flicker near a rough altar. A few villagers kneel in prayer. You watch, fascinated by their devotion. Religion isn't just faith here, it's survival. Every prayer, every ritual, is a shield against fear. The fear of disease, hunger, death. You realize that in this world, hope is the only luxury. You step back outside, and the brightness blinds you for a moment. The air feels thicker now, and your stomach churns. You're dizzy from the smoke, the smells, the hunger. You find a shady spot under a tree and sit down. A dog trots by and sniffs your hand before wandering off. You close your eyes for a second, just to rest. You tell yourself it's only been a few hours, but it feels like days. When you open your eyes again, you see villagers gathered near a well, whispering. Then you hear the faint sound of a bell again, not the church bell, but smaller, sharper. You don't know it yet, but it's the signal for work, taxes, or trouble. In the Middle Ages, all three feel the same. You stand up slowly, brush the dirt off your clothes, and take a deep breath. The day has just begun, and you're already exhausted. The idea of morning routine hits differently here. It's not skincare, not coffee, not checking your messages. It's surviving smoke, mud, and the occasional flying chamber pot. You look around at the busy village, and realize with a sinking feeling, this is normal life here. And you're the strange one, the outsider who doesn't belong. The smell of cooking hits you again, faint, smoky, and vaguely edible. You follow it like a starving animal, until you find a few villagers crouched around a fire, stirring something thick in a pot. Their faces are tired but calm, eyes half closed from the smoke. A woman tears a piece of hard bread in half and dips it into the pot before chewing slowly. That's breakfast, if you're lucky. You glance around for somewhere to sit, but there's nothing but dirt and stones. So you just stand awkwardly, trying not to stare. The woman notices you hovering and raises an eyebrow. You try to smile, but it comes out more like a grimace. She sighs, scoops a bit of porridge into a wooden bowl, and hands it over. You mumble a thank you. She doesn't understand, but she gets the tone, that universal please don't hate me, I'm hungry sound. You take a sip. It's barley mixed with water and a hint of smoke. No salt, no sweetness, no joy. It tastes like someone boiled sadness. Still, you're starving, so you eat every last spoonful. Around you, villagers eat in silence. No chatter, no laughter, just chewing and coughing. Breakfast isn't a social thing here, it's fuel to survive another day. A man walks by carrying a wooden pail filled with what looks like weak beer. You notice even the children are sipping from mugs. It's not about fun. The water is so filthy that fermented drinks are safer. Everyone, from toddlers to grandmothers, drinks ale like it's water. You take a cautious sip from the man's offer. It's sour, warm, and tastes faintly like bread gone bad. Still, you feel a tiny buzz in your head, and for a brief moment, it almost feels comforting. You sit there watching people eat and realize how quiet mornings are in this world. No clinking spoons, no chatter, no music, just the sound of wind, fire, and livestock. You can hear everything: a rooster scratching nearby, a cow snorting, someone chopping wood. It's strangely peaceful, but in that heavy way that makes your bones ache. After breakfast, the energy changes fast. Everyone scatters, each heading to their task like clockwork. The women clean up, the men grab tools, and even kids have chores: fetching water, collecting eggs, feeding animals. Nobody's idle. You realize quickly that standing still here makes you look suspiciously lazy, so you grab a stick and pretend to help poke the fire, hoping no one notices you're faking it. A farmer passes by leading an ox, the wooden yoke digging deep into the animal's neck. His clothes are caked with mud, his face lined with exhaustion. He glances at you and smirks, maybe thinking you're too soft to survive his world. He's probably right. You've only been here a few hours, and you already want a shower, a nap, and a different century. The woman who fed you earlier suddenly points at you, then at a bucket by the well. She says something sharp in a language you don't understand, but her tone is clear. Get to work. You hesitate, but she folds her arms, waiting. So you pick up the bucket and head for the well, trying to look like you belong. The rope creaks as you lower it down, the wooden handle rough in your palms. When you pull it back up, your arms burn. The bucket is heavier than you expected. You stagger slightly, but manage to carry it back to her without spilling too much. She nods, impressed, or at least not disappointed. You feel oddly proud of yourself for surviving your first medieval chore. Then she points again, this time to the pig pen. You groan quietly but obey. Inside, the pigs snort and shove against you as you dump the slop into their trough. They smell like wet socks left in the sun. You hold your breath and try not to gag. When you're done, one pig looks up at you with a blank stare, as if to say, "Welcome to the team." When you return, your boots are covered in filth, and your stomach feels like it's doing cartwheels. The woman hands you a small piece of bread as payment. You look at it, it's tiny, stale, and hard as stone. You still eat it. You're learning that in this world, food isn't pleasure, it's survival currency. Every crumb matters. A group of kids runs by, dragging a wooden hoop with a stick, laughing wildly. You watch them for a while. Their faces are dirty but happy. They don't know anything else. To them, this isn't harsh life, it's just life. You smile a little. For a second, it almost feels peaceful. Then someone yells nearby, breaking the calm. A man trips and falls into the mud. Everyone laughs, a deep, rough laughter that echoes across the square. You can't help but laugh too. For a brief moment, it feels like the first normal thing you've done since arriving here. You look down at your hands, covered in grime, and think, maybe you're starting to fit in. But the ache in your back and the rumble in your stomach remind you this world isn't built for comfort, it's built for endurance. You stretch, trying to ease the soreness in your shoulders. The air smells of burning wood, manure, and life all mixed together. You've eaten, worked, and survived your first morning. Then a loud clang echoes from the edge of the village, metal striking metal. The blacksmith's forge. People start heading that way, carrying tools, blades, and pots. You stand up, curious, and decide to follow. You're about to discover what hard work really means. You follow the trail of noise until the heat hits you first. The smell of hot metal and sweat fills the air, and sparks flicker like fireflies every time the hammer strikes. The blacksmith's forge glows orange, smoke curling into the grey morning sky. You can feel the heat on your face, even from a distance. The blacksmith himself is a mountain of a man, arms thick as tree trunks, beard singed at the edges, and hands that look like they could bend steel bare-handed. He raises the hammer again and slams it down, the rhythm sharp and brutal. Clang, clang, clang. Each strike seems to echo across the entire village. You stand there, mesmerized, watching molten metal take shape. He's crafting a horseshoe, maybe a blade, maybe both. The air smells like iron and ash, and his movements are almost hypnotic. Muscle, fire, and focus. This isn't just work, it's survival. You realize this man is the village's lifeline. Without him, no tools, no weapons, no plows, no nails to hold homes together. Someone nearby catches you watching too long. "Ye want work?" they ask, smirking. You hesitate, but the blacksmith glances up at you and gestures toward a pile of coal. It's not a question, it's an order. You nod quickly and step forward. The heat doubles as you enter the forge. It's suffocating, the kind of warmth that makes your lungs ache. You pick up a small shovel and start feeding the fire, trying to copy what others do. Sweat pours down your face instantly. Your modern brain screams for air conditioning. The blacksmith grunts approvingly, a rare compliment. He takes the red-hot metal with tongs and plunges it into water. Steam bursts out, hissing like a wild beast. You flinch. He chuckles. First time. You can't understand his words exactly, but the tone says enough. You nod again, wiping your forehead. Your eyes sting, your hands shake, and yet, it feels oddly rewarding. You're actually helping. He hands you a smaller hammer. You look at it, unsure. He nods toward the anvil. You step closer, trying not to breathe too deeply. The metal glows like liquid sunlight. He holds it steady and gestures for you to strike. You swing too soft. He shakes his head. Harder. You try again. Clang. Sparks explode. The sound rings in your bones. He grins. Better. For a while, You lose yourself in the rhythm. Hammer, heat, hiss. It's primitive and beautiful, a strange harmony of destruction and creation. Every spark feels alive. Every breath is smoke and fire. You've never worked like this before. No screens, no buttons, no shortcuts, just raw effort. And even though your arms ache and your shirt clings to your skin, part of you feels a weird sense of belonging. But it doesn't last. The heat finally wins. You stumble back, dizzy, gulping at the smoky air. The blacksmith laughs, not cruelly, just knowingly. He's seen this before. Outsiders always think they can handle the forge. They never last. He waves you off kindly, maybe telling you to rest. You stumble out of the forge, blinking as the cooler air hits your face. Outside, the world feels softer, almost quiet after all that clanging. You sit by a fence, your clothes soaked through, your arms trembling. A child walks by carrying a bucket almost half his size. You watch him disappear into the crowd, wondering how people grow up so strong here. Life builds muscle fast when every day is a battle. You look down at your hands. Blisters are already forming. The skin is pink, tender, burning. You flex your fingers and wince. Somewhere deep inside, your modern instincts are screaming. Soap, cold water, disinfectant. But none of those exist here. You can't even explain what a Band-Aid is. A woman passes by and sees your hands. Without saying anything, she tears a strip from her apron, dips it in a bucket, and wraps it around your palm. The water stings, but her gesture is gentle. She mutters something soft. Maybe you'll live. You nod, grateful. There's kindness here, hidden beneath the dirt and hardship. You lean back against the fence, watching the sky again. The sun has climbed higher now, casting golden light over everything. The smoke, the roofs, the people. It's almost beautiful in a rough, gritty way. The village looks alive, every person a piece of a moving puzzle. You start noticing details you missed earlier. The way the baker's smoke rises in steady trails. The sound of chickens scratching for food. The soft murmur of women washing clothes near the stream. You can even hear the faint crackle of fire from the forge behind you. It's like the entire village breathes together, a single organism powered by sweat and willpower. But that harmony is fragile. Out of nowhere, a loud bell rings again, sharper this time. Everyone stops. Heads turn toward the church at the center of the village. The priest, dressed in dark robes, steps out and begins shouting something in Latin. You can't understand, but the crowd listens carefully. Some people cross themselves, others look worried. The energy shifts instantly. Men grab tools that could double as weapons, pitchforks, axes, whatever's handy. Women pull children closer, whispering hurried prayers. You suddenly realize how exposed you are. There are no police, no sirens, no safety nets. If danger comes, you either fight or hide. The priest keeps talking, his voice rising, mixing with the sound of clanging iron and nervous whispers. You can feel the tension like the whole village is holding its breath. Then, after a few long minutes, people start to relax again. False alarm. The priest lowers his arms, murmurs a prayer, and retreats inside. The crowd disperses, but slower this time. You can tell they're still uneasy. You breathe out slowly, realizing how fragile this life really is. One rumor, one shadow in the woods, and everyone's on edge. You suddenly appreciate how easy modern safety feels. Locks, lights, laws. Here, it's all just trust and luck. You decide to walk a little farther, away from the noise. Beyond the village square, a dirt path winds through the fields. Wheat sways gently in the wind, gold against the blue sky. It's peaceful again, deceptively peaceful. You take a deep breath, letting the air fill your lungs. Despite everything, the hunger, the heat, the fear, there's beauty here too. A kind of raw, honest beauty that only exists in a world where nothing is guaranteed. You pass a farmer kneeling by the crops, whispering to himself as he works. Maybe praying for rain, maybe just talking to the earth. His hands are cracked, his face sunburned, but there's a strange calm in his eyes. You envy that peace, the acceptance of a hard life. Then your stomach growls again. You laugh quietly. Even in the Middle Ages, some things never change. Hunger doesn't care about centuries. You head back toward the village, the smell of smoke and baked bread pulling you in again. Another bell rings in the distance. Not an alarm this time, but a signal for midday prayer. People pause whatever they're doing. Some kneel, some just bow their heads for a moment before returning to work. You stand still, not sure what to do, so you copy them. Lowering your head took for a second. Everything is silent. No hammers, no talking, no animals, just quiet reverence under the pale sun. It's peaceful, because here, survival isn't a lifestyle choice. It's the only option. The sun climbs higher, the light growing hotter and sharper until it feels like it's pressing down on your skull. The village hums with the rhythm of work, hammering, shouting, the rustle of fabric, the splash of water, the occasional cry of a baby echoing through the narrow lanes. Everyone has somewhere to be, something to do. Nobody wastes daylight. You wander through it all, the dirt warm under your feet, the air thick with dust and sweat. It smells like life, in all its rawest forms. Smoke from cooking fires, manure from animals, sour ale, damp wood, and the unmistakable human stench of too many bodies packed close together, with no running water. You try not to breathe too deeply. A man carrying a basket of fish bumps into you, mutters something in frustration, and keeps walking. The smell he leaves behind clings to your clothes, salt, rot, and river mud. You glance toward the stream where he came from and see others washing clothes, dumping waste, and filling buckets from the same water. Suddenly that fish smell makes more sense. You realize how fragile health is here. You can almost feel bacteria laughing at you in the air. There's no soap, no sanitizer, no concept of germs. Illness isn't an accident here. It's part of the background noise of life. As you pass the baker's hut, you hear coughing, deep, rattling coughs from inside. You peek through the small window and see an old woman sitting near the oven, her face pale and drawn. She's wrapped in layers despite the heat, her lips cracked, her eyes dull. A younger woman, maybe her daughter, is kneading dough beside her, glancing at her every few seconds. You catch fragments of their conversation, tones soft but worried. You don't need translation. The old woman's sick, and everyone knows it. You keep walking, but that cough follows you, echoing faintly between the houses. It makes you think of how people survive sickness here, or how they don't. No hospitals, no antibiotics, no safety net, just herbs, prayers, and hope. If someone gets sick, you either recover slowly or disappear quietly. A bell rings again in the distance. This time it's not for prayer. It's slower, heavier, a funeral bell. The sound rolls through the air like fog. People pause, look toward the church, and bow their heads. No one cries loudly. Grief here is quiet, worn down, almost routine. Death isn't shocking, it's just another kind of work. You feel a chill crawl up your spine despite the heat. You follow the sound toward the edge of the village, where a small crowd has gathered. The priest stands by a wooden cart, his voice low and steady as he sprinkles water over a rough wooden box. The coffin's too small, too light. You don't stay long. You don't need to see more. You already know. As you walk away, you realize something. Nobody's really clean here. Not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally. Dirt seeps into everything, your clothes, your skin, your thoughts. And yet somehow, life keeps moving. Babies are born. Bread is baked. Laughter still echoes between houses. Humans, you think, can survive anything if they just keep moving. By midday, the air feels heavy with heat. You find shade under a tree near the field and sit down, your legs shaking. You look out at the farmers bent over their crops, silent, rhythmic, patient. Their backs curve in perfect unison, hands pulling weeds and tossing stones with practiced efficiency. The sun beats down mercilessly, but they don't stop. They can't. The soil decides everything, hunger or survival. A few meters away, a young woman hums softly while tying up bundles of herbs. Her tune is simple but haunting, almost like a lullaby. You close your eyes for a moment, listening. The sound drifts through the air like a ghost of comfort. Then, something sharp cuts through the calm, the buzz of flies. You open your eyes and notice a cluster of them hovering near a ditch just beyond the field. The smell hits next. Sweet, sickly, unmistakable death. You glance closer and see what looks like the remains of a dead sheep, half buried, left to rot. The villagers don't seem to notice anymore. Death is just another smell in the air. You lean back, feeling the weight of this world pressing down on you. Everything here is raw, unfiltered, and alive in a way modern life never is. You can't hide from anything, not from hunger, not from death, not from the smell of the earth itself. It's all in your face, all the time. And yet, there's a strange beauty in that honesty. No pretending, no filters, just existence in its most brutal and pure form. You watch the sky again. The clouds drifting lazily, the sunlight shifting gold across the fields. Somewhere, a distant laugh, maybe children playing with sticks. Somewhere else, the faint toll of the church bell again. This world moves slow, but it never stops. A shadow falls across you. You look up and see a man standing there, his hands on his hips. His clothes are rough, but his eyes are kind. He says something, gestures to the field, and points at the scythe resting nearby. You understand he's offering you work. You hesitate for only a second before nodding. You're already covered in dirt. What's a little more? He smiles faintly and hands you the scythe. It's heavier than it looks, the blade slightly rusted. You step into the field beside him, mimicking his movements. He swings with grace, each cut smooth and even. You swing, not so gracefully. The blade catches the stalks awkwardly, barely cutting through. He chuckles but doesn't mock you. Instead, he adjusts your grip, shows you how to move with the rhythm of the grass. Like this, he says, or something close to it. You try again. This time, it feels right. The scythe glides through the wheat with a satisfying hiss. It's hard work, but it has a strange rhythm. Swing, breathe, step. It becomes almost meditative. For a while, you forget the smell, the hunger, the fear. You just move. When you finally stop, your body is trembling, your shirt soaked with sweat. The man claps you on the back, grinning. He says something that sounds approving, and even though you can't understand, you feel it. For once, you've done something right here. You've earned your place, if only for a few minutes. The sun starts to dip lower, and shadows stretch long across the field. The golden light makes everything look softer, almost beautiful again. The work ends with quiet satisfaction. No cheers, no high fees, just slow nods and tired smiles. You walk back to the village with the others. Your hands blistered, your back sore, your stomach empty again. The smell of stew drifts from somewhere thick, smoky, maybe even meaty. You can't wait to find it. As you enter the village, you notice how the world has changed color. Everything's orange, glowing. The smoke from the chimneys rises lazily into the air, blending with the twilight. Kids chase each other between houses, laughter echoing like music. For the first time since you arrived, the place doesn't feel like a nightmare. It feels like life. Hard, filthy, unfair life, but still life. You stop by a barrel of water, splash your face, and watch the ripples distort your reflection. You don't look like you anymore. Your skin is darker from dirt, your hair flat with sweat, your eyes a little harder. You're becoming part of this world without meaning to. But just as that thought settles in, a voice cuts through the calm. It's urgent, panicked. You can't understand the words, but you see the fear in people's faces. Something's wrong again. If you ever thought your gym's locker room smells bad, you clearly haven't time traveled to a medieval town in summer. Because, friend, the medieval world had a, let's just say, unique relationship with cleanliness. Let's take you there. You're walking through a narrow cobblestone street, hem of your tunic brushing against old hay, and then yes, that smell. It's part sweat, part smoke, part ... humanity. It's everywhere, because bathing was complicated business. For starters, people didn't always think being clean was healthy. Many believed washing too much could open the pores to disease. After the fall of Rome, those luxurious public baths, the ones with marble floors, hot steam, and gossip corners, were seen as dens of sin. By the early Middle Ages, bathing became a bit ... suspicious, a sign of vanity, maybe even moral weakness. Still, people weren't completely filthy. They just bathed differently. Wealthier nobles might have a wooden tub dragged into their chambers, filled bucket by bucket with water heated over a fire. If you were lucky, they'd add herbs or rose petals to mask the stench. But if you were a peasant, you'd probably just stand in the rain now and then and call it God's bath. And soap. Forget your lavender-scented bars. Medieval soap was often made from animal fat and lyre gritty, harsh substance that left your hands cleaner but your skin begging for mercy. Most people just scrubbed with sand, ash, or even bread crusts. Yes, bread. You've got to admire that kind of creativity now. To be fair, there were bathhouses in many towns, especially during the early and high Middle Ages. They were social places. People went there to talk, relax, and, let's be honest, sometimes for a little extra service under the warm water. Over time, that reputation led the church to frown upon them, and by the 14th century, many bathhouses were shut down for being immoral. So, the daily hygiene routine, it depended heavily on who you were. A monk might wash his hands and feet regularly, but avoid full bathing for fear of lustful temptation. A knight returning from battle might get a quick dip if there was a stream nearby. And the peasants, they often lived their whole lives coated in a fine layer of earth, smoke, and sweat. But the smell wasn't just people, it was everything. Streets doubled as sewers. People tossed chamber pots out of upper windows with a classic shout, "God," meaning look out. Imagine walking home at night after a long day in the fields, and suddenly, and no, it wasn't rain. That's why everyone wore hoods and cloaks, not just for fashion, but for survival. Cities didn't have proper waste systems, so the combination of animal dung, rotting food, and human waste created a permanent odor that even nobles couldn't escape. People carried sweet-smelling herbs in little pouches, or pomanders, just to mask the air. Even doctors believed bad smells caused diseases, so when the Black Death rolled in, they wore those long-beaked masks filled with spices and flowers. Teeth brushing, that's another horror story. Most people didn't. Some used cloth to rub their gums or chewed herbs like mint or sage. Toothpaste didn't exist, though one medieval recipe suggests using crushed charcoal and honey. Effective? Maybe. Delicious? Definitely not. And hair care, let's talk about that battlefield. Lice were a common part of life. People often shaved their heads or wore linen caps to control them. Fleas? Everywhere. Flea combs were prized possessions. Even nobles' dogs were infested, and their owners thought nothing of it. Despite all this, cleanliness wasn't entirely forgotten. Medieval people associated water with purity, both spiritual and physical. Before big feasts or religious days, washing was important. Monasteries even kept rules for when and how to clean the body. But soap, warm water, and privacy were luxuries reserved for the lucky few dots. So imagine you a modern person who panics when the Wi-Fi drops. Trying to survive in this world, there's no hot shower waiting for you, no toothbrush, no deodorant, no clean clothes after one wear, just the same tunic for weeks, a vague hope for rain, and the ever-present perfume of life, death, and manure. At this point, you'd probably be begging for your 21st century bathroom. But don't run back to your time machine just yet. We haven't even touched on the next part of your medieval day, food and drink. Because in a world without fridges, fast food, or coffee, surviving mealtime was its own kind of adventure. So, after trudging through muddy streets and surviving the sensory assault of medieval hygiene, you've earned yourself a meal, right? Except, brace yourself, because unless you're dining in a lord's hall, your medieval lunch isn't going to look or taste anything like what you'd find on your plate today. Let's start with the basics. Bread. Everyone ate bread. It was the foundation of the medieval diet, but the kind of bread you got depended entirely on your social rank. Nobles had soft white loaves made from finely ground wheat flour, the sort of bread that practically whispered privilege. Peasants, on the other hand, were gnawing on coarse brown bread filled with bits of bran, seeds, and sometimes gravel, not on purpose, but because millstones shed tiny pieces of grit into the flour. So if you had bad teeth before, that bread would finish the job. Now, you might be thinking, okay, bread's fine. What about some meat? Sure, if you're rich. A noble feast might include roasted swan, venison, boar, or even peacock. Yes, they roasted peacocks and then redressed them in their feathers just to show off. Meanwhile, you, the peasant, were lucky to see meat once a week. Usually salted pork or fish if you lived near water. The rest of the time, it was all about pottage, a thick stew of whatever was lying around. Barley, onions, cabbage, maybe a carrot if you were blessed by the vegetable gods. But let's talk about flavor. Spices were the medieval version of cryptocurrency, expensive, valuable, and shipped from faraway lands. Pepper, cinnamon, and saffron were worth their weight in gold. Nobles used them in everything, sometimes to the point of absurdity. They didn't even care what the meat was. As long as it was drenched in spice, it was fancy. Poor folk, on the other hand, seasoned food with salt or herbs like parsley and saggif. They had any at all. And yes, salt was a luxury too. It preserved meat through the long winters, but only the wealthy could afford it in abundance. The poor often ate food slightly past its prime. Or, to be blunt, half. The trick was to boil it long enough to kill whatever was living in it, and then just pretend it was fine. Now, drinks. Water wasn't always safe, especially in towns where people dumped waste into rivers. So, what did everyone drink instead? Ale. Weak homebrewed ale was the hydration of choice for peasants. It had low alcohol content and was safer than water. Even children drank it daily. Nobles, meanwhile, had imported wines, flavored meads, and fancier brews. But wine didn't travel well, so it often arrived sour. Their solution: add spices and honey, of course. Let's not forget dairy. Milk wasn't stored long, no refrigeration meant it spoiled quickly, so people turned it into cheese or butter. Peasants had soft, sour cheeses. Nobles had creamy, delicate ones imported from far away. And eggs, common but precious. You wouldn't waste one unless it was a special day or your chicken had been particularly productive. Now, desert. Medieval people didn't have sugar until it was imported from the East, and when it arrived, it was outrageously expensive. The rich sprinkled sugar on everything like a status symbol. The poor made do with honey, sticky, smoky, and occasionally full of bee bits. Feasts, however, were a different universe. Picture long tables covered with trenchers, flat slabs of stale bread used as plates. Once they soaked up enough grease and gravy, servants collected them and handed them out to the poor. Waste not, want not. Entertainment during dinner included musicians, jesters, and, if your host was feeling extra dramatic, trained bears or monkeys, because nothing says bon appétit like a bear juggling in the corner. And table manners. Let's just say medieval etiquette was creative. Forks were rare. People ate with knives and fingers, and washing hands before a meal was encouraged, mainly so you didn't disgust your neighbor. You'd tear meat apart, dunk bread into saucers, and drink straight from shared cups. A polite diner made sure not to lick their knife or wipe their nose with their sleeve, but you know it happened. If you're still hungry, maybe you should know about fasting. The church controlled much of medieval eating habits. On Fridays, Lent, and over 100 other days a year, meat was forbidden. People ate fish, eggs, or vegetables instead, but rich folks always found loopholes. For example, beavers were considered fish because they lived in water, so, yes, medieval people sometimes ate beavers for Lent. Still, not all was grim. A fresh loaf, a pot of warm stew, a jug of ale was comfort in a world of cold stone and endless work. Meals were community events. Families, neighbors, even entire villages gathered around the same pot. You'd share what little you had and swap stories about saints, storms, and scandals. But for a modern human like you, raised on snacks and hygiene standards, it'd be rough. Imagine eating the same stew every day for months, drinking only ale, and chewing bread that grinds your molars down like sandpaper. You'd be begging for a burger by day 3. So, you've eaten sort of. You've survived the smells, and you've made peace with the fleas. But before you congratulate yourself, remember, the medieval world wasn't just dirty and hungry, it was dangerous. Because after dinner, when darkness fell and the candles burned low, that's when the real trouble began. Nightfall in the medieval world wasn't peaceful, it wasn't cozy, and it definitely wasn't safe. When the sun dipped below the horizon and the last light of day vanished, an entirely different world came alive, one of fear, superstition, and danger. Forget your streetlights, door locks, and police patrols. Once darkness fell, it was you versus the night. You'd better hope your candle lasted. Let's imagine it. The last bell from the church tower fades, echoing through the stone streets. People hurry to get inside, shutters slamming, bolts drawn. The town watch shouts their warnings. No one out after curfew, and the gates to the city are closed. If you're still outside at that point, congratulations, you're officially on your own. Because at night, everything changes. In towns and cities, the streets are pitch black, except for the occasional flicker of a lantern hanging over a tavern door. Most people couldn't afford oil or candles, so they moved by memory and instinct. Even if you tried to bring light, it wasn't much help. Your candle would barely illuminate your own feet, and the dark was not empty. Thieves, cutpurses, and drunkards prowled the alleys. Highwaymen waited outside the walls. Murder was surprisingly common, and justice was slow. There were no detectives, no fingerprints, no forensics, just witnesses and superstition. If someone disappeared, you prayed they hadn't ended up floating in the river by morning. The town watched. Let's just say they weren't exactly heroes. Most were older men paid poorly, armed with a stick and a lantern, shouting things like all's well, while secretly hoping no one proved them wrong. If they caught someone after curfew, the punishment could be brutal. Jail, whipping, or worse, depending on who you were. In the countryside, things weren't much better. Wolves roamed the forests. Bandits hid along roads, waiting for unlucky travelers. The night was alive with sounds, owls rustling leaves, distant howls, and without modern understanding, everything was fair game for imagination. Witches, demons, spirits, people believed they were real. And after a few nights out there, you might start believing too. Let's say you're lucky you're home. You're inside a creaky wooden cottage with one tiny fire and a family packed into a single room. You'd think you're safe, but there's still plenty to fear. Fire, for one. With thatched roofs and timber walls, one spark could burn your entire life to ashes. So people kept the hearth low, but not out. They needed it for warmth. Then there were diseases. Rats came with the dark, nibbling crumbs, spreading fleas, and with them, and yet, cats, which might have helped, were often distrusted, thought to be witches' familiars. So the rats stayed, so did the fleas. Inside, everyone slept together for warmth. Parents, children, even animals, sometimes chickens under the bed, pigs near the door, cows in the shed right outside. You'd hear the soft breathing of your family, mixed with the creaks of the wind, and, if you were unlucky, something scratching at the door. Was it just a stray dog, or something worse? Medieval people didn't just fear thieves and wolves, they feared the night itself. They believed darkness was the devil's hour, when spirits and the restless dead walked the earth. That's why prayers before bed were serious business. "Now I lay me down to sleep" wasn't cuted, was literal protection. Sleep itself wasn't what you'd expect either. People slept in two segments: first sleep and second sleep. You'd drift off after dusk, wake up in the middle of the night, maybe pray, talk, or even visit neighbors before going back for your second sleep. Imagine wandering around at 2 a.m. in pitch darkness, knocking on a door just to chat about crops. That was normal, and if you were a traveler forced to stay in a roadside inn, brace yourself. Inns were crowded, noisy, and reeked of sweat and ale. You might share a bed with total strangers, sometimes two, sometimes five. Your belongings, you'd better sleep on them, or risk waking up with nothing. Crime wasn't limited to men with daggers either. Some of the worst dangers came from power itself. If you were accused of theft, witchcraft, or even bad behavior, the night could end with you being dragged off by guards or local lords. Trials by ordeal: boiling water, fire, or combat awaited in daylight. For women, nights were especially dangerous. Walking alone could ruin your reputation or your life. Safety depended on family, faith, and community. Doors were barred not just against animals, but men. And yet, amid all that fear, medieval nights had their own strange beauty. Stars blazed more brightly than we can imagine today, unclouded by pollution. The Milky Way was a visible river of light. Owls called through the silence. Fires glowed faintly in hearths, and the night sky felt almost sacred. People felt connected to it, tued by it, even as they feared it. So, could you survive a medieval night? Maybe, if you stayed quiet, kept the fire low, and didn't peek outside when you heard scratching. But even then, sleep wouldn't come easy. Between the cold, the fear, and the constant awareness that you were one bad dream away from waking up to chaos, you'd be begging for your electric lamp and front door lock. But don't get too comfortable yet, because even if you make it through the night, dawn doesn't bring peace, it brings work. And in the medieval world, work didn't just fill your day. When the rooster crowed in the medieval morning, you didn't groan, roll over, and check your phone. You got up, because the day's survival literally depended on it. The medieval world didn't run on clocks, it ran on daylight, muscle, and endurance. No one cared if you were tired. You woke up with the sun, or before it, and you worked until it vanished again. Let's start with the peasants, because that's where the majority of people were. Around 90% of the population. Forget the romantic image of peaceful countryside life, with chirping birds and soft sunlight. Real medieval farming was hard. Your hands were cracked, your back bent, and your tools were heavy wooden things that didn't do you any favors. You'd start the day, feeding animals if you had any, then grab your tools and head to the fields. Plowing, sowing, reaping, weeding, it was endless. Rain, you worked. Heat, you worked. Sick, too bad. Your lord expected his share, and the church expected theirs. You'd owe taxes in the form of grain, labor, and sometimes even eggs or cheese. And this wasn't just a seasonal thing. Every month had its rhythm, and every person, from children to the elderly, had a role. In spring, you'd plow and plant. In summer, you'd weed and watch. Autumn was harvest days of back-breaking labor with scythes, cutting through fields of grain. Winter, that was maintenance. Mending roofs, repairing fences, feeding livestock. Rest wasn't a concept. Even meals were fast. You'd eat bread, cheese, and maybe a little ale in the field, sitting on a stone. Lunch breaks didn't exist. You ate when you could, where you could. If the sun was up, you worked. For women, the load was double. They worked in the fields and managed the home, grinding grain, baking bread, spinning wool, tending gardens, caring for children. It never stopped. Laundry wasn't a machine away. It was hours of scrubbing in cold water with rough soap. Cooking meant chopping wood, lighting fires, and making sure you didn't accidentally burn your house down in the process. Children, no childhood as we know it. They worked as soon as they could walk straight and hold something. Herding animals, fetching water, scaring off birds from crops. Education was rare unless you were a noble or a boy lucky enough to join the church. Speaking of nobles, let's not think they had it easy either. Sure, they weren't out digging in the dirt, but managing estates was serious business. You had to oversee harvests, collect taxes, attend court, and most importantly, stay alive. A noble's life was constant political balancing, dealing with rivals, family feuds, and wars that never seemed to end. Knights trained endlessly. Their job was to fight and to serve their lords, which meant drills, tournaments, and brutal warfare. Chainmail armor alone weighed about 20 to 30 kilograms. Imagine wearing that all day while swinging a sword in 30-degree heat. Even resting was painful. After battle, wounds weren't neatly bandaged. They were cauterized with fire. And let's not forget the craftsmen, the townsfolk who lived between peasant and noble life. Blacksmiths, tanners, carpenters, they worked from dawn till dark, each trade brutal in its own way. A blacksmith inhaled smoke and metal dust all day. A tanner worked with animal hides, soaked in urine to loosen hair. The smell of a tanning yard was legendary. Bakers rose before sunrise to knead dough for the day's bread. Millers risked their fingers every time they touched the grindstone. In monasteries, life was no holiday either. Monks lived by the clock, praying, copying manuscripts, tending gardens, caring for the sick. Prayer was their labor, but it was still labor. Every hour had a purpose, from sunrise to sunset, and silence was often mandatory. Work injuries were constant. Cuts, burns, broken bones. No one stopped working because of them. If you couldn't work, you were a burden. There was no sick leave, no compensation, no safety net. You worked until your body gave out. Average life expectancy, around 35 to 40 years, though if you survived childhood, you could make it longer, but your body would feel ancient long before your hair turned gray. And tools, they were primitive. No tractors, no machines, not even metal shovels for everyone. Just wooden plows pulled by oxen, hand scythes, and simple baskets. Every task took time and human effort, something that takes you 5 minutes today, like grinding. Flour could take hours back then. Even artisans who managed to rise above peasantry had to deal with guilds, taxes, and unpredictable trade. Bad weather could ruin materials. Fire could destroy workshops, and no matter how skilled you were, one noble's whim could ruin you overnight. At the end of the day, your body ached. You had blisters on your palms, dirt under your nails, and clothes stiff with sweat and dust. You'd eat a simple meal, sit by a dim fire, and fall asleep on straw, hoping tomorrow's weather didn't ruin everything you'd done. For modern people like us, used to breaks, weekends, and comfy chairs, this world would crush you. You'd probably last half a day before collapsing in the field, begging for air conditioning and a snack. Yet somehow, medieval people managed. They worked hard, not for ambition or luxury, but for survival. Their pride wasn't in owning much, it was in making it through another season, another harvest, another day. But what happens when work isn't enough? When fate turns against you and the harvest fails, the animals die, and hunger creeps in. Because in the medieval world, that wasn't rare. It was expected. In the medieval world, survival wasn't guaranteed, not even close. You could do everything right, work hard, pay your taxes, pray every night, and still, one bad harvest or one sick rat could destroy your entire life. It was a world where fate felt cruel, unpredictable, and often terrifyingly fast. Let's start with famine, the silent killer that haunted medieval people like a shadow. There were no supermarkets, no storage silos, no backup plans. Every harvest mattered. If the crops failed because of too much rain, too little rain, frost, or pesture, whole village could face starvation. The grain you grew wasn't just food, it was your future. Without it, you had nothing. Imagine this: the summer rains don't stop, the fields flood, the grain rots, and by autumn, your storage bins are half empty. You start stretching meals, watering down soup, baking thinner bread. By winter, the hunger sets in deep. Your stomach gnaws at itself, and every morning, you wake up weaker. You watch your neighbors with haunted eyes, wondering how much longer anyone can last. And people did terrible things when famine came. They boiled grass, ate bark, even ground up bones for flour. Chronicles from the 14th century described mothers abandoning children, villages turning ghostly, and people resorting to things too grim to say out loud. In 1315 to 1317, one of the worst famines in European history struck. Rain fell endlessly, grain rotted in the fields, and tens of thousands died. Those who survived didn't forget it. Even when food was plenty, disease was always waiting. Let's talk about the Black Death, the plague that hit Europe in the mid-1300s like an invisible apocalypse. It came from fleas on rats, carried along trade routes from Asia. No one understood germs, of course. To medieval minds, this was divine punishment, curse from God. It started with fevers and swelling in the armpits and groin, black, painful lumps called bub. Then came vomiting, bleeding, and death, often within 3 days. People fled cities, abandoning friends, families, even priests. Entire towns vanished. Historians estimate it killed up to half of Europe's population. Imagine walking through your town, and every other house is empty. The bells toll constantly for funerals, until even the gravediggers die. The smell of death fills the air. Cats and dogs roam freely. The streets are silent except for crying. People thought the world was ending, and it wasn't the only plague. Typhus, smallpox, leprosy, dysentery, they all made regular appearances. Clean water was rare, food spoiled fast, and doctors were about as helpful as a horoscope. Their best advice: balance your humors. That meant bloodletting, purging, or applying leeches. Imagine being sick and your doctor saying, "Let's drain half your blood. That should help." Leprosy was one of the most feared diseases. It wasn't actually as contagious as people thought, but those who got it were banished from society. Forced to live in leper colonies, they had to ring bells to warn others of their approach. People believed they were cursed, punished by God, and if disease or famine didn't get you, war probably would. Medieval Europe was a battlefield: mosaic lords fighting lords, kings warring over borders, crusades heading east in the name of God. Armies were brutal, burning fields, slaughtering peasants, and spreading more disease. Soldiers rarely got paid. Instead, they looted what they wanted. For the ordinary villager, every passing army was a nightmare. Nature joined the cruelty. Storms, floods, fires, all could destroy what little you had. In 1342, a flood swept through Central Europe, washing away entire towns. A century later, a cold spell known as the Little Ice Age shortened growing seasons, causing more famines. To the medieval mind, none of this was random. It was punishment, fate, or a test from God. People filled the churches, praying for mercy. When prayers didn't work, they turned on each other. Jews, foreigners, women accused of witchcraft. Someone had to be blamed. Panic made monsters out of the desperate. But through all this darkness, there was resilience. People buried their dead, then planted again. They rebuilt villages, rebuilt faith, and somehow found the strength to keep going. Songs were written, stories told, and every sunrise meant one more day survived. Still, if you were there watching rats scurry underfoot, hearing the love in the medieval world wasn't like the fairy tales. Forget candlelit dinners, long walks by the river, or writing sappy poetry under the stars. For most people, marriage was a business deal, one that involved land, cows, or political leverage, not fluttering hearts. If you were a peasant, love didn't factor into it much. You married who you could afford to marry. A farmer's daughter might wed the boy from the next field because his family had a decent ox and a few hens. Romantic attraction came second to survival. Marriage meant teamwork, someone to share the fields, milk the cows, raise the children, and pray the roof didn't collapse in winter. For nobles, it was even colder. Marriages among the upper class were chess moves. Kings and dukes arranged unions to secure alliances, end wars, or gain territory. Love, that came after, if it came at all. Picture being 13 and told, Congratulations, you're marrying the Duke of Burgundy's son. You'll move next month. That was normal, and yet, love still found a way to sneak in, usually in all the wrong places. Knights fell for other men's wives, monks wrote secret love poems, and troubadours sang about courtly love, a romantic ideal that had little to do with reality. Courtly love was about longing, not fulfillment, loving from afar, suffering beautifully. It was passion wrapped in poetry and hopelessness. One of the most famous examples is the tale of Lancelot and Guinevere, the queen of King Arthur. He was the bravest knight, she was the king's wife, and their forbidden love brought down Camelot. That story became a symbol of the kind of love medieval society dreamed about, but could never actually allow. In reality, medieval relationships were messy. Men often held legal power over their wives. Women had limited rights to property or divorce. Domestic violence wasn't uncommon, and the church discouraged separation, even in abusive marriages. Priests told women to endure patiently. That was the advice. But women weren't entirely powerless. In towns, widows could inherit businesses. Some ran inns, workshops, or even breweries. And behind the scenes, many wives controlled household money and farming decisions. Quiet power, but real power. Love before marriage was risky business. Premarital sex could mean public humiliation, fines, or being forced to marry in shame. But humans are humans, and not everyone followed the rules. Court records from the 13th century show plenty of secret engagements, broken promises, and scandals. A boy might promise marriage just to get a girl into bed, then vanish when she became pregnant. Pregnancy out of wedlock was a disaster. You could be thrown out of your home, shamed, or sent to a convent. The child might grow up branded as illegitimate, unable to inherit land or title. Some women tried desperate remedies, potions, herbs, and prayers to avoid that fate. Still, there were moments of real affection. Letters between medieval couples, rare but precious, show tenderness, jokes, even longing. A knight writing from war might tell his wife he misses her cooking or her laughter. A peasant husband might carve her name into a wooden bowl. These small gestures were as human then as now. Love was also dangerous. In medieval Europe, adultery wasn't just a sin, it could be a crime. A noblewoman caught cheating might be imprisoned, mutilated, or executed. Even a peasant woman risked public shaming or a brutal beating. Men usually got lighter punishment, of course, and yet, passion refused to die. Behind stone walls and church laws, lovers found secret gardens, forest clearings, hidden letters. Love became rebellion, a flicker of freedom in a world ruled by duty. As for heartbreak, that was timeless. Whether you were a peasant girl whose lover was drafted to war or a queen trapped in a loveless marriage, grief hit just as hard. Songs and poems of lost love filled medieval culture. A knight rode away, a maiden wept by the window, a widow prayed for the soul of her husband. The language changed, but the feeling didn't hate, and if your heart broke too deeply, you didn't have therapy. You had prayer. The medieval answer to heartbreak was to take holy vows and join a convent or more than a few broken-hearted nobles turned to religion when love failed them. So no, you probably wouldn't survive medieval romance either. Between the arranged marriages, moral rules, and total lack of emotional safety nets, your modern idea of love conquers all wouldn't stand a chance. But love still lived in secret glances, whispered promises, and fleeting touches in the candlelight. Even in an age of duty and death, people dreamed of something more. And that's the thing about the Middle Ages. No matter how dark, the human heart kept beating. If you think religion today can be intense, you haven't seen anything until you've stepped into the mind of a medieval Christian. In the Middle Ages, faith wasn't just a personal belief, it was the air people breathed. God was everywhere, watching everything. Heaven was the dream, and hell was the threat that kept everyone in line. Imagine waking up each morning to the sound of church bells. They didn't just call people to prayer, they told the rhythm of life itself. The bell rang for work, meals, births, and deaths. Even your crops were blessed in the name of God. People didn't question faith, they lived inside it. You'd see crosses carved into doorframes, charms made of saint bones hanging from necks, and holy water sprinkled over nearly everything from newborns to new plows. Sin wasn't something you shrugged off. It was a deadly infection of the soul. Every action, every thought, every temptation could mean the difference between eternal paradise and everlasting fire. The church ruled hearts and minds, not just spiritually, but politically and financially. The Pope could order kings around, and priests controlled access to salvation. You couldn't read the Bible yourself. Most people couldn't even read at all, so whatever the priest said was God's law. Full stop. If you sinned, and you definitely did, because everyone did, you had options: confession, penance, or pilgrimage. Sometimes penance meant prayers, sometimes fasting, and sometimes walking barefoot hundreds of miles to a holy site. And if you couldn't go, you could pay someone else to go for you. Yes, even in religion, outsourcing existed. But here's the kicker: people didn't believe bad things just happened. If there was a plague, it was because God was angry. If crops failed, someone had sinned. Lightning struck your barn, probably witchcraft or divine punishment. People didn't see random misfortune. They saw moral lessons written into the world. Fear was the church's strongest tool. Priests painted vivid pictures of hell, oceans of fire, demons tearing souls apart, endless screaming. Medieval art was full of it. In churches, you'd see frescoes of tortured sinners hanging on the walls, just to remind you what awaited the unrepentant. Children grew up seeing those scenes every Sunday, and purgatory, that was the in-between place. A kind of cosmic waiting room for souls that weren't bad enough for hell, but not pure enough for heaven. People feared it too. Families spent fortunes buying indulgences, little documents that supposedly reduced your time in purgatory. Imagine a spiritual subscription plan: pay now, pray less later. Still, not everything was fear. Religion also offered comfort. In a world full of hunger, violence, and disease, the church promised meaning. Life might be cruel, but heaven was eternal. A poor farmer could look at a rich lord and think, "You may have gold now, but I'll have glory forever." It gave people hope, something worth holding on to when everything else failed. Festivals and feast days broke the monotony of toil. Every saint had a day. Every miracle had a story. There were processions, music, and wine, because if you couldn't find joy on earth, at least you could taste a bit of heaven's promise. But not everyone agreed with the church's version of things. Mystics claimed they spoke directly to God. Heretics questioned priests' power. The church burned some of them alive to set an example. It was a dangerous time to think differently. Monks and nuns lived in cloisters praying for everyone's souls. They copied manuscripts, grew herbs, and devoted their lives to silence and reflection. Some truly found peace, others just hid from the chaos outside. Their monasteries were islands of calm in a stormy age. Then came the pilgrimages, one of the most powerful spiritual experiences of the medieval world. People of all ages and classes set off to visit holy sites: Canterbury, Rome, Santiago, or Jerusalem. They walked for months, barefoot, begging along the way. It wasn't just faith, it was suffering as devotion. Each blister, each hunger pang, was believed to bring you closer to God. If you had the money, you could buy holy relics, bits of saints' bones, drops of blood, even splinters of the true cross. The trade was booming. Some relics were real, most weren't, but people didn't care. Faith made them real. And for those who feared dying without confession, there were death bells. When someone lay on their deathbed, the church bells rang to summon prayers for their soul's safe passage. Death was terrifying, but it was also sacred. The final test of belief. Religion wrapped around every part of medieval life, from the cradle to the coffin. It dictated laws, morals, and even architecture. Cathedrals soared above towns like mountains of stone, designed to make humans feel small before the might of God. But perhaps the most haunting thing was the silence, the kind of silence that came after the priest's sermon on hellfire. When people shuffled out of church, eyes wide, praying under their breath, you could almost feel the weight of eternity pressing down. If you woke up sick in medieval times, the first thing you'd probably do was pray, because medicine back then was less science and more "let's see if this works." Doctors weren't useless. Exactly, but their understanding of the human body was, let's say, optimistic. Picture this. You're lying in bed with a fever. Your village healer leans over you with a leather pouch full of herbs, mumbles a Latin prayer, and then calmly tells you that your body is unbalanced. Too much black bile, not enough phlegm. You nod, trying not to panic, as she pulls out a bowl and a razor. Yes, you're about to be bled. Bloodletting was one of the most popular treatments of the medieval era. Doctors believed that sickness came from imbalances among the four bodily humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Each humor was tied to personality, mood, and even the planets. Too hot You had too much yellow bile. Too sad. That'd be black bile. The solution: drain some blood, slap on some leeches, or make you vomit until balance was restored. Leeches were the all-stars of the medieval medical kit. Hospitals, if you could call them that, kept jars of them like candy. They'd stick them on your skin to draw out the illness. And, strangely, it sometimes worked, or at least didn't kill you. Then there were the herbalists, usually older women or monks, who actually had some practical knowledge. They used garlic for infections, honey for wounds, and willow bark, which contains the chemical that inspired aspirin for pain. The problem was, most of their cures came wrapped in superstition. You couldn't just drink a tonic. You had to stir it counterclockwise, under a full moon while reciting a psalm. And don't even think about seeing a surgeon. Surgeons were basically butchers with ambition. They'd fix broken bones, pull teeth, and occasionally cut out infected limbs, without anesthesia, of course. The only thing you got for pain relief was a stiff drink, a stick to bite on, or maybe a prayer to St. Luke, the patron saint of physicians. Hospitals weren't what you think either. They were more like hostels for the dying. You didn't go there to get cured, you went there to prepare your soul for death. Nuns and monks cared for the sick, but medicine was secondary to salvation. The goal wasn't necessarily to heal your body, it was to save your soul. For the rich, things were a bit fancier, but not much better. Wealthy patients could hire university-trained physicians who'd quote Aristotle while prescribing crushed pearls and ground emeralds. Yes, you might actually drink jewels, because in theory, they purified the body. In practice, they just made you poorer. And then there were the plagues. Nothing reveals the limits of medieval medicine quite like the Black Death. When the bubonic plague swept through Europe in the 14th century, doctors were clueless. Some blamed bad air miasma, others thought it came from sinners, or from the alignment of the planets. People carried posies of flowers to filter the air, hence the old rhyme, ring round the rosy. To prevent infection, they burned herbs, avoided bathing, yes, seriously, and wore amulets engraved with prayers. The infamous plague doctors with bird-like masks came later, filled with spices and perfumes meant to block out evil vapors. They didn't help, of course, but they looked impressively creepy. When death was everywhere, people got desperate. You'd see self-flagellants, groups of men whipping themselves through the streets, hoping their pain would appease God's wrath. Others turned on minorities, blaming Jews, foreigners, or witches for spreading the disease. Fear turned into madness. If you somehow survived a plague, or an infected wound, or a surgery, congratulations, your immune system was elite, because hygiene was non-existent. People rarely washed. Water was often filthy, and bathhouses became associated with sin, so the church frowned on them. Cleanliness is next to godliness wasn't a medieval motto. It was more like, bathing invites temptation, and dental care. Toothaches were treated by burning herbs against your cheek, or rubbing a dead mouse on your jaw. If that didn't work, someone would yank the tooth out with iron tongs while you screamed into a rag. Mental health wasn't better understood. People with depression or seizures were thought to be possessed. The treatments ranged from holy water and exorcism to locking you away in a monastery for your own good. But despite all that, there was progress. Monastic infirmaries recorded which herbs worked best. Arab scholars like Avicenna wrote medical encyclopedias that Europe slowly began to study. By the late Middle Ages, anatomy lessons and dissections became more accepted. It was slow, painful learning, but learning nonetheless. And some medieval remedies, strange as they sound, actually worked. Honey and vinegar for wounds, antibacterial, garlic for infections effective. Even certain leeches produced mild anticoagulants that improved blood flow. For every 10 bad ideas, one was surprisingly solid. Still, life expectancy was grim. If you made it past childhood, you might reach your 40s. Most deaths came from infection, childbirth, or accidents. One bad cut, one bad tooth, one bad winter, and that was it. So no, you wouldn't last a day in medieval medicine. Between the leeches, bloodletting, and burning fevers, your modern body and patience would crumble. But back then, people didn't expect comfort. They expected endurance. They faced illness with prayer, grit, and a grim kind of faith that maybe, just maybe, heaven had a cure where earth did not. If you think you could survive medieval food, you might want to reconsider. Forget your modern snacks, spice racks, and take-out menus. Food back then was a matter of survival, not taste. The average person's daily meals were as predictable as they were bland. And when nature decided not to cooperate, starvation was always just one bad harvest away. Let's start with the basics. A medieval diet depended entirely on who you were. If you were a peasant, and let's be honest, 90% of people were, your meals revolved around bread, pottage, and maybe some seasonal vegetables. That's it. Pottage was a kind of thick soup or stew, made by boiling whatever you had: grains, beans, onions, cabbage, and, if you were lucky, a bone for flavor. Meat. That was a fantasy. Most peasants saw it only on special occasions, like Christmas or a wedding feast. And even then, it was often salted, dried, or half-spoiled. You didn't waste good meat on the lower classes. Chickens were valuable, not for their flesh, but for their eggs, cows for their milk, and pigs because they could survive on scraps. Killing an animal was a big decision. You needed it alive more than dead. Now, bread was life, literally. It was the center of every meal, the symbol of survival. But it wasn't the fluffy kind you're imagining. Peasant bread was dark, coarse, and heavy, made from barley, rye, or oats, mixed with ground-up peas, and sometimes sawdust like filler during bad years. White bread existed, but that was for the nobility. The color of your bread basically announced your social class. Water wasn't always safe to drink, so people drank ale instead, weak beer made from barley. It was nutritious, mildly alcoholic, and far less likely to make you sick. Even children drank it daily. The stronger beer was reserved for festivals or long workdays when a bit of a buzz helped dull the pain of existence. For flavor, herbs like parsley, sage, and garlic were used, but spices like cinnamon or pepper, those were worth their weight in gold, literally. Pepper came all the way from India and was locked in chests like treasure. Only lords, bishops, and rich merchants could afford to sprinkle it over their roasted peacocks or venison pies. Ah yes, the nobles. Their dining tables were another universe. While peasants gnawed on barley bread, the upper class feasted on roasted boar, swans, pheasants, and eels. Banquets were displays of wealth and power, sugar sculptures shaped like castles, pies that released live birds when cut open, entire courses just for show. But even their food wasn't always good. Preservation was poor, and spices often masked the taste of decay. The illusion mattered more than the flavor, and the manners. Forget forks, those didn't become common until much later. People ate with their hands or small knives, wiping them on the tablecloth or, if you were polite, on a piece of stale bread. The wealthy dined from shared trenchers, flat pieces of bread that soaked up gravy, which servants later ate. Waste not, want not. Now, famine. That was the true monster of the Middle Ages. One bad season, one cold spring, and the crops could fail. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 was catastrophic. Endless rain ruined the grain, livestock died, and entire villages starved. People ate bark, grass, and even the leather from old shoes. Chroniclers whisper of darker acts, the kind you'd rather not imagine. Hunger changed people. It made them desperate, angry, and wild. Families fled their homes to beg in cities already overcrowded. Priests preached repentance, claiming God was punishing humanity for its sins. And when things got really bad, people turned on each other, accusing neighbors of hoarding food, blaming witches for cursed harvests. Even in good years, the medieval diet lacked nutrients. Scurvy, rickets, and other deficiencies were common. Winter was especially cruel. Fresh produce disappeared, and people relied on salted meat, dried peas, and whatever root vegetables hadn't rotted in the cellar. You'd be lucky to get through February without losing weight or teeth. Feasts, though, were the bright spots. When harvests were good, or a wedding came around, villages came alive. Music, dancing, mead, and mountains of food. Roasted lamb, bread, baked fresh pies, stuffed with berries. For a few brief days, everyone forgot how fragile life was. Food was also deeply spiritual. Bread and wine represented the body and blood of Christ in every Mass. Fasting was seen as holy, denying the flesh to purify the soul. During Lent, meat was banned, so fish became the go-to meal. The church even invented clever loopholes, classifying certain animals like beavers and puffins as fish, so people could eat them without breaking the rules. Yes, you read that right. Medieval logic at its finest. But behind every meal, there was work endless, grinding labor. Women rose before dawn to grind grain, bake bread, brew ale, churn butter, and cook meals for their families. Men plowed, sowed, harvested, and slaughtered. Food didn't come from markets. It came from your sweat and calloused hands. And if the Lord raised taxes or the tithe collector came knocking, your grain might vanish before you could feed your children. Hunger wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a weapon. Landlords, kings, and even the church used it to control people. So, could you last a day in their world? You'd miss your morning coffee by sunrise. By noon, you'd be chewing hard bread and boiled cabbage, wishing for salt. And by night, when hunger gnawed at your stomach, you'd understand why people prayed before every meal, not out of habit, but out of gratitude that there was any meal at all. Still, food wasn't just survival, it was community. Every shared loaf, every pot of stew, every feast after famine reminded people that even in the hardest times, life was worth celebrating. By the time the Middle Ages drew to a close, the world had begun to shift in ways no medieval peasant or even king could have imagined. For 1,000 years, life had moved at a slow, grinding rhythm. Birth, toil, prayer, death, repeat. But near the end, the great wheel of history started turning faster. The air itself seemed to change. The darkness didn't vanish overnight, but cracks began to appear, and through them, light started to spill. In the 14th and 15th centuries were centuries of chaos and transformation. War, plague, and rebellion tore through Europe like wildfire, leaving the old world trembling. But from that destruction came something new: ideas, inventions, and possibilities that would reshape everything that came after. Let's start with the Black Death. It had wiped out nearly half of Europe's population. Entire villages vanished. Fields went But oddly enough, after the horror, society didn't collapse, it evolved. With fewer people, labor became valuable. Peasants could demand higher wages. Some even walked away from their lords' estates, choosing freedom over feudal chains. The old social order where kings ruled by divine right and peasants obeyed without questions started to crack. The church, once unshakable, began to lose its grip too. Scandals, corruption, and the devastation of the plague made people question the clergy. Why had so many holy men died? Why hadn't God protected them? Movements for reform began to stir, whispers that faith didn't have to come through priests, that maybe ordinary people could read the Bible themselves. Those whispers would one day grow into the Reformation. But even in the late medieval period, doubt had taken root. Then came fire and iron, the sounds of war changing. The medieval knight, once the symbol of power, found himself obsolete. Plate armor was no match for the new technology creeping onto battlefields. The longbow, the crossbow, and, eventually, gunpowder. Suddenly, a commoner with a firearm could kill a noble in shining armor from a distance. It was the end of chivalry and the beginning of something far more modern and terrifying. In towns, trade was booming. Markets grew into cities, cities into centers of power. The rise of merchants and guilds created a new middle class, one that didn't care about noble birth, but about skill and profit. Wealth began to move in strange new directions, and with trade came ideas. Ships sailed further, maps grew clearer, and whispers of distant lands reached Europe's ears. Silk, spices, and strange stories arrived from the east. Curiosity stirred. The world was no longer a flat map drawn around Jerusalem. It was round, vast, and full of mystery. Then there was the invention that changed everything: the printing press. Around 1440, Johannes Gutenberg's machine began to roll out pages faster than any monk could copy them by hand. Knowledge, once locked inside monasteries, started spilling into the streets. Books became cheaper. Literacy spread. Suddenly, people could read not just scripture but stories, science, and philosophy. The Middle Ages had been built on silence and obedience. Now, people began to think. Art changed too. Painters and sculptors started to look at the world differently. Instead of flat, symbolic saints, they painted real faces, real bodies, real light. The human being, flesh, emotion, imperfection took center stage again. It was the dawn of the Renaissance, the rebirth of human curiosity that had been sleeping for centuries. But for ordinary people, daily life was still hard. Even as towns grew, the poor still scraped by. Wars raged. The 100 Years' War between England and France dragged on, leaving villages burned and fields trampled. The Crusades faded, but conflict never really stopped. Every generation had its share of blood. And yet, there was something new in the medieval wind: a restlessness, a sense that the world could be different. The children of serfs dreamed of owning land. Artisans dreamed of independence. Scholars dreamed of truth beyond what the church allowed. For the first time, in a long, long time, people dared to imagine change. Imagine standing in a medieval street around the year 1500. The old and the new collide around you. In one direction, a monk still chants prayers in Latin. In another, a printer's shop clatters with the rhythm of a new world. A knight rides past, his armor gleaming, but a merchant beside you mutters that guns will make such men irrelevant soon. You smell smoke, ink, bread, and the sea. The world is waking up. The medieval mind, for all its superstition, had built the foundations of everything to come. Universities, cathedrals, trade routes, languages, and law. Even the mistakes, the fear, the cruelty, the blind faith taught lessons that would shape modern humanity. It's easy to look back and laugh, to say, I'd never survive that time, and you're probably right. You wouldn't. The hunger, the filth, the fear, it would crush you. But those people did survive. They kept going, generation after generation, through plague and war and darkness. They dreamed, they built, they loved, they prayed. Without them, there'd be no us. The Middle Ages weren't a single age of ignorance. They were 1,000 years of human endurance. A long night that led, slowly but surely, to dawn. And as that dawn broke the first rays of the Renaissance painting the horizon gold-hued, hear church bells ring across Europe one more time. A sound both ancient and new. A sound saying, wake up. The world has changed.